The town may be kind of small, but these folks have big smiles and big hearts, and they know what it is to have simple fun down our way, where old-fashioned singing and homey gatherings make living mighty pleasant.
Here's musician and writer Eric Beatner.
I can remember being in Boston and going to some of the great record stores like Newbury Comics. I remember there was a worker at Newbury Comics listening to Buffalo Tom. I don't know if you remember them.
I was just going to say they're one of my favorite Boston bands.
Well, the song
Great
Velvet
band.
Roof was playing in store, and I was up near the counter, and that song came on, and she just went on a rant to no one, just to the air. This song should have been just as big as Smells Like Teen Spirit. God damn it. This is just as good an air guitar song as Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I was like, damn, she's right.
Dave's rolling.
Welcome to Abandoned Albums, the documentary podcast where we take a closer look at some albums that may have been forgotten about over time, some albums you might not know existed, and some albums by some new, or at least new to us, artists we think you should know about. I'm your host, Keith R. Higgins.
The paper doesn't give many details. Tell me about this.
It was a really unique time when there was a lot of creativity going on, and a lot of young people were really empowered to go out and make art and do things on their own for themselves. It was really a special, unique time.
We're going to take it back to the era of music that was all that and a bag of chips. That is, of course, the 1990s. That 1990s music, very popular among millennials and Gen X, Gen Z, still kind of hanging with what's current. But in the total U.S., it's actually tied for current music.
On this episode of Abandoned Albums, we're once again letting a band tell their own story. This week, it's Buffalo Tom and their third album, 1992's Let Me Come Over. Take a deep breath, Gen Xers. The album is now 30 years old, which, if you're anything like me, is the average age of my dungarees.
Now, Buffalo Tom is an alt-rock band out of Boston, Massachusetts, formed by the friendship of three University of Amherst students, Bill Janovitz on guitar and vocals, Chris Colbourn on bass and vocals, and Tom Maginnis on drums. They derived their name from the band The Buffalo Springfield and the drummer's first name, so kind of random, but there you go.
Coming together at the peak of the 1980s college rock scene, Buffalo Tom, along with their University of Massachusetts Amherst brethren, Dinosaur Jr. and the Pixies, would employ woodshedding and road work, particularly overseas, to become three of the poster bands that would help define the dawn of what would soon become the mushroom cloud known as alternative music in the 1990s. And like many bands of that era, Buffalo Tom straddled the fence between punk, acoustic rock, hard rock. They had a touch of pop, a dash of twang, and solid songwriting. Many of the ingredients of the budding genre that was about to reach critical mass. Grunge.
What do we need to know about Buffalo Tom?
It's one of the best American 90s guitar bands I know.
After 8 years of grinding away, with Let Me Come Over, Buffalo Tom shed some of the punk-leaning elements of the first two albums and found a voice that was distinctly their own. But let's let the band tell you that. Here's lead singer and guitarist Bill Janovitz.
We started out, we didn't really know each other extremely well. We were friends, and we were all in kind of different bands, but we'd all go see the same kind of music, and we had a lot of mutual friends, and then we became friends ourselves, and then we decided to form a band out of that. So it kind of came from friendship more than like, hey, I know a great bass player and a great drummer that we should get together. It was more like, no, let's all pick up some instruments and see if we can get a band together. And it's been sort of like that. I think we've evolved from that. But it's been like, those first couple of years were probably, when we started getting on the road, it's like, wow, you're still trying to figure out who you are at 22, 5, 6, whatever age we were. And then you're trying to get along with others, can you play nicely with others? Yeah. Weirdo situation of 6 weeks in a van.
Your album, Let Me Come Over, was part of my soundtrack of my adolescence. What was yours?
Yeah, tons of Stones records. I grew up sort of listening to the classics, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Dylan and that sort of Zeppelin and all that stuff. And that stuff really, to this day, resonates for me. But the sort of turning point records, like the points of in my adolescence that, you know, I felt like were my own bands, were bands like, you know, Talking Heads, Remain in Light. I had known a little bit of the Talking Heads, but when I got that record, Remain in Light, it was like so far out of space that I still listen to that record and just think how amazing it is. And then you know, that same year I got like U2's first record, Boy, and I started listening to my friends got like, you know, we would share our records, and my friends would get these that first Clash record, and all of a sudden it was like, it felt like we're finding our own bands, you know, like this was like these bands. I don't have any older siblings, but you know, these like the Stones and those guys are like bands of our older brothers and sisters, and that was cool and we loved it. But all of a sudden, like, we started finding out new bands, and the Talking Heads, like I said, weren't new at that point, but they were almost new. And U2, that was their first record. And I remember going to see like the English Beat and having an REM opened up for them, and just thinking, oh, this band REM is fantastic. And so, you know, there's always those records that are turning point records, and that first REM record, then the Fresh Replacements records, and then the Who's Could Do records. Those are things that really just like rang for me, you know. Yeah.
Here's bass player Chris Colbourn.
Like when we were little kids, if we looked back at music 25 years before, that music was, you know, the World War II era, like, you know, things, and so what a great chasm between that and rock.
1986 is an important year, both for you and for me, because I was born then.
Wow. Yeah, and we were too.
And you started.
Yeah. Oh wait, what?
That's a long stretch of time. Can you still? For me it is. Can you?
A lifetime, some might say. Right. For example, you. Yeah.
What were your goals then? Can you still recall what you wanted to do with the band?
Where we formed University of Massachusetts, we were just begging to even play people's parties for free. And then once we got to do that, there were bands that would come through University of Massachusetts, and it was really hard to even get on the bills for free. So to get a Boston gig was the first goal, and every kind of goal just went from there.
What were the bands like that you competed with to get those gigs?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, there was two different kind of things going. There was actually, you know, I think very significantly, we were not in the mainstream. We grew up, there were rock stars or you weren't. There was no little bands that existed. So we were in this great middle of this era where there were vinyl singles and small bands kind of playing outside of the city. And that's who we met when we went to college. Jay from Dinosaur was going to do a tour in Europe, I remember we were discussing. And that was kind of amazing. Like, we could barely get a gig in Boston, but he was saying, you know, with our recordings, like, we should try to tour in Europe. And there was a small group of these bands on SST, and our record came out, I think, the first couple weeks that the first Nirvana did on Sub Pop. But not at all like in a competitive way, too. You know, it was really a small group of kind of very, like, we didn't always know each other. We were playing each other's music. It wasn't really a scene, but we were certainly friendly and trying to make a scene. So there was actually never any kind of competitive.
Yeah, I mean, just to get a gig in the college town before we had a label, or a record rather, but you know, because they just wanted people that danced and paid money for drinks, and within a couple of years we had signed to SST Records, that was like getting a platinum record to us, to be on that label with all these artists that we love.
From what I hear you saying is that the step from being a small band playing for a couple of people to being a bigger band was far bigger then than it is now, perhaps? But what steps did you have to take to get to that level, to that higher level?
Once again, here's Chris.
Well, a lot of it was touring. So there was, though, a community. The community grew quick, and there was a rejection, I think, of mainstream music. There's a certain type of mainstream music that I think, you know, that it goes like this all the time, where all of a sudden, you know, God bless the Lady Gaga, but I think that she will cause a revolution in indie, like more independent music, because of just this kind of blown up, Madonna thing happened in our era. Like, so there was this like rejection of that, and this idea to make your own music that's more real, that's not a manufactured thing, and it doesn't mean that other music's bad, but it encourages you, just like the economy kind of sometimes when it's down encourages bands to play even more. And we were broke, and it was pretty much just, there was no idea that you could make any money. So it was just sort of this network with your friends and have a kind of a community. And it was fun, and you talked about books and films were as big a part as the music. I don't think anyone had this idea that it would be, it would result in a couple records later to one of these bands making like a Nirvana kind of Nevermind. That was sort of a surprise, and that changed things in a different way. But even before that, we saw bands like R.E.M. were a huge influence on us, and they were making commercial strides, so they were an influence as well. And that you could look from these very small labels to maybe medium-sized labels, like IRS Records, I remember R.E.M. were on, and then they were distributed by Warner Brothers. So step by step, there were these little things that we would follow along.
Once again, Bill.
A really good book that captures the scene right before we kind of came into it was Our Band Could Be Your Life is the name of the book. And it talks about this touring circuit, this real do-it-yourself, grassroots, I'll stay on your floor when I come through, and you stay on mine when you come through. And that's how we started. We were sleeping on Superchunk's floor or Bitch Magnet's floor, and we were sharing equipment and bands and sound guys, so wherever it was a real kind of community. And like Chris said, when Nirvana happened, it was really sort of pre and post, everything just sort of changed. And mostly for the good. I think a lot of great bands all of a sudden started getting heard. But it was a lot of the people that were running our labels and our agencies. Like, we're still working with the same touring agent in the States that we were in 1988 or 9. And he got bigger, everybody got bigger and started making more decisions, and all of a sudden they're the ones with interns and secretaries helping them, and now they're the ones in charge, and then it kind of went in a weird way again, and that's when we kind of stepped off the train a little bit.
There is a chemistry thing for bands to have longevity. It doesn't always mean the best bands either, or the worst bands. It's no really comment on their their skills or whether I think they're a good band, but it is curious to see that this group of music has lasted a great amount of time. There's definitely, like, when I see young bands or bands starting out, and I remember that feeling of walking into a record store and having someone say like, "Oh, aren't you in a band?" And that only is a short portion of your life, but it's that thing about identifying yourself as a musician from your whole life, never anyone saying that, and it's a really special feeling that only comes along once. I kind of miss that. And as much as I think it's really nice when people are like, oh, my band was inspired by you, or like, you know, or you're a significant band, like, wow, you're going to Europe to do this thing, like, that never makes me feel good. I don't know, it just doesn't hit me in the same way. You know what I mean? Like, there was a certain magic moment there that I think I really miss that. I see it with bands.
I look back with pure nostalgia sometimes and go, yeah, that was really exciting. You think of all these first playing in Holland, seeing posters going, and that was all, and those are great memories to share with people. But I think there's also something really cool. Like, I play poker with these older guys like every 2 weeks, and they're suburban guys. There's a contractor, a guy that's a career recruiter, a guy that's a TV producer, and they just are like, they just look at me with wide eyes like little boys when I tell them, like, yeah, we're going to Belgium, and yes, they give us beer to drink and to play music, and they all want to come on tour, and it's a little bit of a fantasy, and there's something that's still great about that, and to be sort of respected, quote unquote, or whatever, or looked up to, or inspiration for somebody, that's another fold to this all, that we never thought we'd be the veterans. We always thought we were the young up-and-comers.
Why can't he act his age?
That's what I'd like to know, Jim. Well, you know what to do about the desk. But now this pencil. If you were a first grader, I'd just keep it, wouldn't I?
Oh, but Mr. Edmonds, I'm not a first grader.
Oh, you're not. So suppose you start fixing that desk. Come back for your pencil when you feel you're ready for it.
Yes, sir.
Have you found the perfect way to combine the two lives you seem to have? Is there a good balance?
You know, balance is just all about adjusting every day to things. So I don't know. I think the simple answer is I think we've, over the last 2 records, but it takes a long time. See, I mean, it took we feel like we're back in some sort of group, but it took 3 years to make another record, it seems like. There's no pressure to be out there doing it. It's just kind of when the inspiration comes, and we can all kind of find that common ground for art and time allowed. But then we go into our different worlds a little bit, and our worlds are still in the same orbit with each other, so we see each other a lot. But everybody's got different concerns and different things to balance, but we're all in the same kind of boat.
We aspire to this sort of thing that I remember Nick Cave writing about, really trying to, it becomes a part of your life, and he wanted to work on songs every day. He was a great inspiration there for a while for me, because he was this guy who aspired to be a Leonard Cohen, and like, he was just in a rock band, but he was saying, I want to study these guys. I want to, start writing songs every day and really work towards it. And his band was popular, but way less popular than in my era. But he was getting older, but he said, oh no, I'm going to keep working on this. And some of it's goofy, and some of it's, I'm just going to keep writing though, and I'm going to learn to sing better. I'm going to sing, with other people, and sometimes that's, you get scared that art's going to be terrible. But I thought his work really, like Boatman's Last Call, was one of the great records ever, and it was very mature, I guess, which isn't supposed to be great when you're an artist like Nick Cave. But that was the kind of inspiration to me. It was like, wow, look at these guys. Like, look at this. Like, that's heavy. We can really, that's what we do. I think we were on that path. And so even if we're not on tour or whatever, we were still at home kind of making these songs on the weekends. I think we're in the middle of that right now. And we're very critical of each other. It's still hard. But I feel like we're on that, it's kind of a very righteous fight. And I think later maybe, hopefully look back on these records and see like, oh, that's a nice little catalog of like 4 or 5 records, real songwriter kind of things here, like a nice, totally different than the early part of their career, maybe where they were touring and their music was was popular, but wow,
10 years or 8 years back when you were on a break, would you have thought you would sit here? Was there ever a moment you thought, well, Buffalo Tom is over?
We kind of stepped off the touring and recording cycle a little bit, but we were still playing, and we still were in fact touring a little bit, but very short little tours on an A-sides and a B-sides record. But we had a #1 single in the UK with this cover of The Jam. That was the hugest success we'd ever had, and So we kind of came over and did a little tour around that. But we were having families, and we just didn't have the time and the attention to devote to Buffalo Tom that we did in the older days. And now we kind of moved back. We don't have that much time either, but we sort of carved out more time to get back on the recording thing. Because we kept playing, and the band was a very vital presence, but we didn't want to become just trapped in nostalgia either. We wanted to keep doing new music. I don't know. I mean, I think when we first took the break, it probably could have gone either way if we ever really kind of got back and did more records. We left it open-ended. We didn't make a clean break, and we didn't say we're not, or we didn't say I'll meet you back here in a year and we'll record. It was kind of left open-ended and just let to evolve.
Need some help, son? Why, yes. Do you have a knife or something to open this?
Yes, I guess so. Bright crop of young fellows in this school never grow up. Still little boys playing with marbles, pulling girls' hair. Well, there's no sense in cleaning up here.
When the spotlight was really on us, I felt very uncomfortable, and I felt not deserving of, I'm a little more, my sense of rock music too is like, I'm embarrassed sometimes when rock musicians are sort of put themselves up against some of the great things in life. Some of the rock bands that we've toured with seem to be like, it's their moment, they're making $1 million or whatever, so that they're their very significant thing. And that's when it really occurs to me, like, almost that feeling like, as a kid when my dad would sort of be quizzical about the Beatles, I understand that feeling of like, I like rock, love rock music, and then there's some guys who I really think are amazing artists, but a lot of it's just rock. It's just 3 or 4 chords. We're just having fun, like just playing kind of down at the bar or in a basement. I think when it gets too much serious, which we lived in an era where it became a big business, that was kind of rotten.
I get wary when I hear a band say that they're, the songwriter's a poet, or that Jim Morrison was a poet, that kind of stuff. It's just rock and roll lyrics, but at the same time, I don't mean to downplay them. I think we place a lot of importance on our lyrics, and but it's not to say that we can't write a dumb rock song every once in a while.
Being a trio just basically defines our sound. If we had another person up there, it would change the whole thing for Buffalo Tom. Even though on records we do fool around with other tracks and we put a lot of piano on, for instance. But to us, it's like the studio thing and how we play the songs live. It's just 2 different translations, And even recording, it's just a kind of a snapshot of where we were with those songs at that time, So to us, it's just like playing them in a 3-piece. It's just as valid, like just as playing them acoustically. It's just a whole different way of doing it,
You have a lot of control over dynamics when it's just 3-2. Right. Sometimes even with a 4-piece, it tends to get away and you can't come back.
Yeah.
But I can go over to Tom.
It is a little more under control in some ways.
Yeah. Just one person slowing down really can affect the band. Yeah. I think that's if people talk about dynamics within our band.
Drummer Tom Maginnis.
You just have to play with so much, physically play a lot harder and fill up the hole. space, and that gives the band a good energy.
Yeah, the energy just comes from the kind of the passion and kind of what we were interested in. You know, we like loud, hard rock music, you know, but we also like soft and you know, like melodies that you can hum and things like that. So it's just kind of, it's just kind of a combination that we kind of stumbled upon that we really enjoy. But, you know, we're not the first ones to do it, obviously.
Growing up for you, when did you first get bitten by the music bug?
Well, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so I didn't have older brothers or sisters to kind of pass that along to me. But I always remember a time, that there wasn't a particular moment in my life. It just was kind of growing up with AM radio and my parents being casual, but into music. You know, it was an important part of their lives, but they weren't big record collectors or anything like that. And they certainly weren't rock and rollers per se. They were kind of on the cusp of all that. You know, kind of the generation that more or less could have gone either way on that. You know, they could have ended up like 64-year-old Mick Jagger or Tony Bennett, which is, I think, they kind of aired towards the latter.
Yeah.
But you know, just kind of growing up and neighbors, and it was just part of the air in the early '70s. So I inherited some records from neighbors and things like that. But the first album I can really remember going out and buying, I had bought a lot of singles and things like that, but really kind of was buying an actual record was when I was about 12 years old or so. That would have been a Stevie Wonder record.
I'm not crying for ya, or let the angels bore ya. I'm just trying to understand.
Hello there. A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity and is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children. We know that once a person is perverted, it is practically impossible for that person to adjust to normal attitudes.
Do you have a melody sometimes in your head, a vocal melody or a lyric, or do you start with messing around with chords?
It's usually, over the years, it's been like, I don't know what percentage, but mostly starting with chords and just strumming until I hit something, and then a melody might pop into my head, and I take out a little voice memo or whatever the technology of the day was, right. And I start, vocalizing something, some sort of melody. Sometimes, though, I'm riding my bike or I'm walking and a melody pops into my head, and that's happened to me since I'm a little kid, before I even could play guitar.
Yeah.
I always have these like melodies in my head, which sometimes are just variations of popular songs that you hear, and all of a sudden your head takes you somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, obviously the Stones are big in my life, but I always come back to Keith's articulating about, you have to have your antenna up to receive these signals. And sometimes that's really what it's like. But sometimes it's like the Pete Townsend school, which is craft, just woodshedding and sitting down there and playing and playing and playing until stuff comes.
What would you like to read about Buffalo Tom in the rock and roll history books, let's say?
Well, I'd like to be there. I'd like to be in the history books. I mean, we've always been a little bit out of step, I think, with trends. Like we were sort of grungy before grunge got very big, and by the time grunge, which was sort of from Seattle with Nirvana and all those bands, before that really hit, by the time that kind of was making waves, we were bringing it down more acoustic and textured. So we were a little out of step with things. But I'd like to be taken seriously, as an artist, and to be there, mentioned alongside heroes, even as a footnote would be nice.
The songs you heard on this podcast were Velvet Roof, Mountains of Your Head, and Darl. Or is it Daryl? Darl, Tomato, Tomato. All taken from the Buffalo Tom album, Let Me Come Over. You can stream Let Me Come Over and the entire Buffalo Tom catalog wherever you stream your favorite music. Once again, this is audio pulled from various sources, all of which can be found in the show's notes section. Our theme song is Rocket Sled by Blip. Special thanks to Jeff Calhoun. Abandoned Albums was recorded at Thunder Love Studios.
Produced and written by Keith R. Higgins.
Engineered and mixed by Steve Beasley, with help from Mike Hunt. Edited by A.J. Royce.
Original music by Mike Pellegrino.
If you like what you've heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really does help. Thanks for listening.
At Twitter, we are at Abandoned Albums, and on Instagram, we are at Abandoned_albums.
Grazie.
Bailey Leaf, Rob Janicki, S.W. Loudon, Michael Janicki, Steve Beasley, Mike Pellegrino, Tharina Bella, Peyton Janicki, and of course, our executive producer,
This is Thunder Love.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always obediently yours.
Abandoned Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.